I have worked the Solène outer cradle for 22 years, and in that time I have learned two things about the people who give the orders. The first is that they are almost always smarter than me about the things they were trained for. The second is that they almost never know which thing they were trained for is the wrong one to use. That probably sounds unkind. I don't mean it that way. I have watched brilliant people, fleet admirals with chests full of ribbons, navigators who could plot transit corridors through dead star fields by memory, systems engineers who had redesigned the intake manifolds on warships I was not cleared to look at directly. I have watched every one of them spend 3 days staring at the wrong problem. I am not saying I am better than any of them. I am saying I knew the cradle. I had known the cradle since I was 31 years old and still had both my original knees, and that knowledge, on one particular morning in the 3rd week of the Empress's coronation preparations, turned out to be the only thing that mattered. The Solène outer cradle is what we call it, those of us who work it. The proper name is the Sovereign Orbital Anchorage and Residence, first station of the Reach, which is what it says on every official document and every plaque in every corridor, and which no one who actually works there has called it since the first cable was strung between the two main arms 41 years ago. It is a dry dock and a residence and a ceremonial staging ground all at once, which means it was designed to do several things and does all of them in ways that are somewhat inconvenient. The residential block is beautiful, pale stone and fiber crystal arches, long corridors that catch light from the starband at certain hours and go the color of warm sand. I have been in those corridors exactly twice. Once because a refrigeration unit in the service kitchen was making a sound that concerned the head of staff, and once because a door hinge needed replacement and the residential maintenance crew was stretched thin, and someone thought I was on that crew. Both times I was there for less than 30 minutes, and both times I was asked, very politely, to leave by a different route than I had entered. The dock side of the cradle is where I live, and it is not beautiful by any design, though I find it beautiful the way you find anything beautiful that you have spent 22 years learning the moods of. It is industrial, vast. When the main bay doors are open and a carrier-class vessel is being brought in, you can feel the air displacement from 400 meters away, a slow pressure change like the weather is deciding something. The clamp arms, there are 6 of them on the primary docking ring alone, plus 2 secondary arms for lighter traffic, move on systems of counterweighted cable and tension line that I understand better than I understand anything else in my life, including, if I am honest, my own children, who are grown now and work on the other side of the Reach and call me on the 2nd Vareth of every month, which is more than some mothers get. The Empress's flagship is called the Irveth Sovereign. I have seen it twice in my career, once when I was still a junior hand and it came in for a routine resurfacing, and I was assigned to one of the approach guide crews, and once 3 months before the events I am describing, when it arrived ahead of the coronation preparations, and I helped oversee the long-stay mooring. Both times I was struck by the same thing. The ship is immense in a way that stops being a fact about size and starts being a fact about presence. There is a quality to very large things that have been maintained with great care, a kind of dignity in the finish, the way the hull panels meet without gap, the way the running lights are placed at intervals that suggest someone thought long and hard about how the eye would move over them. The Irveth Sovereign has that quality to a degree I have seen in only 2 other vessels in my career, and one of those was a converted grain hauler that its captain had clearly loved like a living thing. For the coronation, the flagship was meant to dock in the primary ring's ceremonial bay, Bay 1, which we keep polished and is used perhaps 4 times a year, and which the rest of the time serves as an informal storage area for equipment awaiting maintenance, because the cradle is a working station, and Bay 1 is still a bay. The ceremony was planned for the morning of the 3rd day of the convocation week. The Empress would arrive aboard the flagship, dock at Bay 1, descend to the cradle's residential level, and then proceed across the starward bridge to the convocation hall, where the formal installation would occur. It was a ceremonial sequence that had been planned, according to the senior chamberlain who came to brief the dock supervisors 6 weeks in advance, for approximately 4 years. The flagship arrived on schedule. The approach was textbook. I watched it from the service gallery above Bay 1, because when a ship of that class comes in, I like to see it. The pilot brought her in at the correct angle, the correct speed, with the kind of unhurried precision that tells you the person at the controls has done this enough times that they are no longer thinking about it consciously, just feeling it. I watched the primary clamp arms swing out, watched the guide lights on the hull come up to confirm alignment, and then I watched the flagship stop. Not slow, not stutter, stop. There was a pause that lasted perhaps 10 seconds, which is a long time when you are watching a ship of that tonnage sitting in space 80 meters from the clamp head. Then the pilot tried again. The ship moved, fractionally, and then stopped again in almost exactly the same position. The guide lights flickered. I heard the dock controller's voice over the bay intercom, very calm, asking the flagship's bridge to confirm their thruster status. The bridge confirmed. I heard the controller ask the clamp arm team to confirm arm position. The clamp arm team confirmed. There was another pause. Then the flagship tried a third approach and stopped in the same place, and the guide lights on the secondary clamp arm, the lighter arm on the starboard side of Bay 1, the one that handles the forward mooring line, went from green to amber. That was when I knew what I was looking at, or I thought I did. I have been wrong before, twice actually in 22 years, which is not nothing. I went down to the floor. I found Darrett, my direct supervisor, a Verath-born man about 15 years younger than me who is thorough and fair and somewhat humorless, which are the only qualities that matter in a dock supervisor, and I told him what I thought. I said the secondary arm's guide wire looked like it was in tension conflict with the primary line, and that if it was, the ship wasn't failing to approach. The ship was being held by the clamp's own geometry, and the fix was probably less than an hour's work. Darrett looked at me. He had his tablet in his hand and his earpiece in, and the earpiece was doing something, because he was half listening to whatever was coming through it while he processed what I said. The systems team has already flagged the approach corridor, he said. Navigation's running a revised vector now. It's not the approach corridor, I said. Soraya, he said my name the way you say someone's name when you want them to understand that this is not the moment. Navigation has it. Stand your section and wait. I stood my section. I waited. The navigators ran 2 revised vectors over the next 6 hours. Neither of them moved the flagship. By the second morning, the Empress's household staff had arrived on the cradle ahead of her, and the senior chamberlain had been in the dock supervisor's office twice, and there were 4 new faces on the dock floor who were wearing the kind of civilian clothes that mean military, which is to say very clean, very plain, and very uncomfortable looking, and who were going from system panel to system panel with their own equipment. One of them was apparently a master systems engineer from the Reach's 3rd orbital facility. 2 of them were navigators of some seniority. I recognized the shoulder notation on their plainclothes collars. The 4th I couldn't place, but she had the look of someone who has spent a career being the person in the room who is right, and who has grown slightly impatient with how long it takes everyone else to arrive at that conclusion. By the end of the second day, they had eliminated the approach corridor, the flagship's drive system, the pilot's calibration, the docking computer's sensor array, the primary clamp arm's alignment mechanism, and the bay's magnetic guide field as sources of the problem. I heard this summarized by one of the plain-clothed navigators to Darrett, who nodded and wrote something on his tablet. I was cabling a secondary thruster mount nearby, which is not exciting work but which had to be done and which put me within hearing range. I did not say anything. I had tried again on the second morning, more carefully. Not to Darrett, he had made his position clear, and I respected it, but to the senior systems engineer, the one from the third orbital facility. I waited until he was in the secondary arms approach zone with his own equipment, running a scan of the guide field emitters along the arm's outer rail. I came up beside him and said I thought the issue might be inside the arm, in the cable channel, and that if he had a few minutes I could walk him through what I was seeing. He looked at me the way technical people sometimes look at dock workers, which is not unkindly precisely, but with a kind of patient skepticism that assumes whatever you are about to say is unlikely to be relevant, because if it were relevant, someone better qualified would already have said it. He asked me what my specialty was. I told him dock mechanics, primary ring, 22 years. He nodded and thanked me and said he would take it under advisement. I do not think he did. I do not hold it against him. He was trained in drive systems and field mechanics, and his training was telling him to look at the field emitters, and his training was not wrong. It was just looking at the wrong layer of the problem. That is not stupidity or arrogance. It is the natural consequence of being very good at a specific thing. The world looks like your specialty from the inside of your specialty. I have done it myself. What I kept noticing across both days of watching them work was the direction of everyone's attention. Every expert came to the dock floor and looked outward at the ship, at the approach corridor, at the field geometry, at the pilot's telemetry. Every one of them was asking the right question with the right tools. The right question was, what is wrong with the approach? The right answer was, nothing. The wrong question was, what is wrong inside the arm? Nobody asked that question except me, because nobody else had spent 22 years listening to that arm, and knowing the particular way it sounds and feels and moves when it is right, and knowing what it sounds and feels and moves like when something inside it is not. That night, the third night, the orbital window the flagship would need to depart on began its 18-hour countdown. There is a window every 72 hours for vessels of that class, due to the way the cradle sits relative to the reach's gravitational gradient. If the ship could not be docked by morning, it would have to pull back to holding distance, and the window would be missed, and the next window would be 3 days later, and the coronation ceremony would have to be postponed, which was a thing that had not happened in 114 years. I am not a woman who lies awake at night over work. I have enough years behind me that most things wait until morning. But that night I did not sleep well, because I was thinking about the secondary arms guide wire, and because I had been right before when the consensus was elsewhere. Not often. Twice in 22 years is not often, and I had been wrong before too, and I was trying to figure out which this was. The first time I had been right against consensus, I was 38 years old and I had been on the cradle for 7 years. A carrier-class vessel was in for resurfacing, moored at Bay 3, and the hull team was preparing to release the starboard primary clamp for a repositioning. I was on the floor below the clamp supervisor's station, running a line check, and I heard a sound from the primary arms tension assembly that I had heard once before, in a training simulator that reproduced fault conditions from actual incidents. I reported it to the clamp supervisor. He told me the tension assembly had been certified that morning. I told him I understood, and that I still thought someone should look at it. He told me to get back to my line check. I got back to my line check. 30 minutes later, the tension assembly split at a casting defect that the morning's certification had missed, and the arm lurched hard enough to score the carrier's hull plating. Nobody was hurt. The repair cost more than I earn in a year. The second time, I was 44, and I was wrong. I thought a guide field emitter on the primary ring was producing harmonic interference with a vessel's navigation array, and I reported it, and the maintenance team pulled the emitter, and the interference was coming from a relay in the vessel's own systems that the captain's crew found 2 hours later. I heard about this from Darrett politely, in the way that Darrett does things politely, and I took the correction and filed it in the way I file all corrections, which is to say I thought about it for a long time until I understood exactly where my reasoning had gone wrong, and then I stopped thinking about it. One right, one wrong, in 41 years of reporting anomalies. Not a bad record, though not a perfect one. I was trying, in the dark, to figure out which pattern the guide wire was going to fall into. What I kept coming back to was this. Every approach the flagship had tried ended in the same position, with the same amber flag on the secondary arm. Not different positions, not random. The same one within a tolerance of about 2 meters. If the problem were in the approach corridor, or the drive system, or the pilot's calibration, the failure point would drift. Small variations in each attempt would produce small variations in where the thing went wrong. It was not drifting. It was precise. And precise failure, in my experience, means a fixed obstruction, something that does not move, something that is doing the same thing every time because it cannot do anything else. The secondary arm's secondary guide wire runs along the lower face of the arm, inside a cable channel that is accessed from a service hatch on the arm's starboard underside. The hatch requires a Class 3 dock credential and a safety harness. I have both. I have had both for 19 years. I got up at 4 in the morning, cradle time, dressed, put my tools on my belt and went to the dock. I will say this for the night shift on the cradle. They are good people who mind their work and who are, at 4 in the morning on the third day of a crisis that has imported a dozen experts to fix, somewhat distracted. There was a cordon around Bay 1, a proper one, with markers and a guard post. And the guard at the post was a young man in Reach security uniform who had clearly been on since well before midnight, and who looked like he was running on stimulus tablets and determination. He checked my credential. He looked at my tool belt. He asked me what section I was assigned to. I told him I was dock crew, primary ring, and that I had come to run a check on the secondary arms cable channel, which was on my section's maintenance schedule. The second part was not entirely accurate. The cable channel inspection was due in 11 days. He looked at his list. I watched him look. I had thought there might be a list because there usually is, and I had thought my name might not be on it because it probably was not. There was a pause. I have found over 22 years that the pause after a credential check is a negotiation, and that the most important thing to do during it is to look like someone who is mildly bored rather than someone who is hoping very much for a particular outcome. Section primary ring is cleared for arm access, he said finally. Stay on the service path. I told him I always did. I went under the cordon marker into the bay and across the floor to the service path that runs along the starboard wall to the secondary arms base. The bay was quieter than I have ever heard it, no active ship traffic, all the peripheral systems on low power standby, just the hum of the life support ventilation and the slow blinking of the guide lights on the arms. The flagship was visible through the outer transparency of the bay mouth, sitting at 80-some meters, its running lights patient and steady. It had been sitting there for 3 days. The secondary arm extends from its base collar about 40 meters out, at an angle from the primary arm. At its end is the clamp head, the articulated jaw that takes the forward mooring line when a vessel docks. The jaw is large and precisely engineered, and something goes wrong with it about twice a year, always the same 3 things in rotation, and I have fixed all 3 of those things so many times that I could do them in the dark, which once I did, because the bay's lighting system failed during a routine dock, and no one wanted to wait 2 hours for the maintenance team, and I happened to have a headlamp. But I was not going to the clamp head. I was going to the cable channel on the arm's underside, which is a different piece of the system entirely, and which requires clipping your harness to the service rail and lowering yourself about 1.5 meters below the arm's body to reach the access hatch. I clipped in, I lowered myself, I opened the hatch. The cable channel is about 60 centimeters wide and lit by a strip of work lighting along its upper seam, which comes on automatically when the hatch is opened. The secondary guide wire runs along the channel's floor on a series of low-friction guides, from the cable drum at the arm's base all the way to the tension coupling at the clamp head. The wire is 7 millimeters in diameter, high tensile, and rated for loads that are, honestly, somewhat reassuring to know about when you are hanging from a service rail a few meters above a very expensive bay floor. I have been in this cable channel perhaps 300 times in 22 years. I know its smell, machine oil, and the slightly metallic odor of a wire under sustained tension, and the faint electrical smell that comes from the work lighting strip when it first comes on. I know the feel of the floor of the channel under my gloves, smooth at the guides, slightly rougher between them where the composite decking has taken normal wear. I know the sound of the wire when it is right. A low, continuous hum, not quite audible, more felt than heard, the vibration of something under proper load traveling through the arm structure and into your knees if you are crouching the right way. The wire was not making that sound. Or rather, it was making it, but at guide 43 the hum had a quality to it, a very slight unevenness, a hesitation in the wave that told me before I looked that something there was not quite right. I have no scientific explanation for why I can hear this. I have tried to explain it to junior hands over the years, and mostly I fail, because it is the kind of thing you either hear or you do not, and you only hear it after enough years of listening to it when it is correct that the incorrectness registers the way a missed step registers on a staircase you have climbed 1,000 times. Your body knows before your mind catches up. I looked at the wire. I looked at it for about 2 minutes, moving the beam of my headlamp slowly along the channel toward the clamphead end. At the 43rd guide, I know the guides. I have replaced 2 of them in my time I found it. The guide itself looked fine. The wire passing through it looked fine. But the wire's position in the guide was off by about 8 millimeters from where it should have been, and the surface of the wire at that point showed a faint bright marking, the kind of bright marking you see when a wire has been running against something it should not run against, for long enough that the finish has been abraded. Not enough to weaken the wire. Enough to indicate that the wire had been shifting laterally under tension, and that the shift had been moving the guide slightly out of its designed axis, and that the cumulative effect of that shift on the tension coupling at the clamp head was a lateral pull, small, precise, repeatable, exactly the kind of pull that would redirect a vessel in final approach by just enough to trigger the amber guide light and cause the docking system to abort. Not enough pull to show up in the arm's position sensors, because the arm itself was not moving. The arm was where it was supposed to be. It was the wire inside the arm that was pulling wrong. I took the tension wrench off my belt. It is a long-handled tool, made for reaching into cable channels without having to remove adjacent components, with a wide adjustable head designed to reseat a wire in its guide without nicking the finish. I have had this particular wrench for 9 years. The handle has a crack in the grip wrap that I have repaired twice with electrical tape, and it is balanced exactly the way I like it, which is something you can only know about a tool after you have used it long enough that your hand has stopped thinking about it. I reseated the wire at guide 43. I ran the wrench along to 42 and 44 to make sure there was no secondary shift. There was not. I checked the wire's lateral position at guide 45, which is the last guide before the final run to the tension coupling. It was good. The whole thing took 19 minutes. I closed the hatch. I pulled myself back up to the service path. I unclipped my harness and walked back to the floor. I was almost at the guard post when I saw her. I did not know, in that first moment, who she was. I saw a tall woman standing in the bay's side corridor entrance, the one that leads to the cradle's residential level, wearing what I can only describe as a morning coat, which is to say a coat you put on when you have been woken early and need to look like you have not, which this woman did, because the coat was clearly designed to look like something you would wear to a formal occasion, but there was a quality to the way it hung on her shoulders that suggested it had been put on in a hurry. She was very still. She was looking at me. There were 3 people behind her. A man in full chamberlain's dress who looked like he would very much like to be somewhere else, a woman in the plain civilian clothes that mean military, and a security officer. I looked at the tall woman for a moment. Then I recognized the face. Not because I had seen it often. I had seen it twice on official broadcasts, and once on a certification plaque in the cradle's main hall that had been installed when the current Empress's mother was sovereign, and which shows the Empress as a young woman at the facility's 10th anniversary inspection. But I recognized the face. I nodded. It was all I could think to do. I was holding a tension wrench and my harness was still partly unclipped at the chest, and I had not slept very well, and I recognized the Empress of the Solène Reach, and I nodded at her the way you nod at someone you have just passed in a corridor. She nodded back. Then one of the plain-clothed military people, not the one who was with the Empress, a different one, who had apparently been watching from somewhere near the primary arms base, was beside me, asking me what I had just done. I told him. He asked me to repeat it. I did. He looked at me for a long moment, then looked at his equipment, then picked up a comm unit and spoke into it. There was a pause. Then a voice came back through the comm unit. I could not make out words, but the cadence was surprised, and the plain-clothed man looked at me again and said, "Stay here." I stayed there. About 4 minutes later, the Ayurveth sovereign moved. I watched it through the bay mouth transparency. The guide lights on the secondary arm came up green. The flagship's thrusters made the slow, careful adjustment of a vessel coming into final approach, not a vessel being pushed by pilot's anxiety, just the natural settling of something very large into its correct position. The primary clamp arm swung out. The guide lights tracked. The clamp head made contact. The mooring line fed through the jaws, coupling with a vibration you can feel in the soles of your boots if you are standing on the right part of the floor, which I was. The Ayurveth sovereign was docked. I heard the bay intercom come on. I heard the dock controller's voice confirm docking complete. I heard, faintly, a sound that I took a moment to identify, because I have not heard it often in a working dock bay. It was the sound of people in a large room somewhere above me beginning to applaud. I put my tension wrench back on my belt. There was a hand on my arm, not gripping, just placed there. I turned. The chamberlain, the man in the full chamberlain's dress, was beside me, and he was looking at me with an expression that I can only describe as someone who has been given a task that he has not yet finished processing as real. "Her Serenity would like to speak with you," he said. I said I was not really dressed for it. He did not appear to know how to respond to this. He looked at me. I looked at him. I was wearing my dock vest, the heavy one, the orange one, with my credential clip on the front and my section patch on the shoulder, and a smear of machine oil on the left side that I had acquired from the cable channel hatch, which I had not noticed until just now. I was wearing work boots that have been resoled twice. I had a headlamp on my head. "Her Serenity," he said carefully, "is insistent." I took the headlamp off and put it in my vest pocket. I reclipped my harness properly. I said I would come. He walked me through the side corridor, through a series of passages that I had not been in before, which connected the dock level to a mezzanine level that I think of as the layer between the working station and the residential block, the place where the two versions of the cradle briefly acknowledge each other. It was warmer here than on the dock floor, and there were small lamps at intervals rather than the overhead strip lighting I am used to, and the walls were paneled in something pale and smooth rather than the utility composite of the bay corridors. It smelled different. Not bad. Just different, less mineral, less machine, more like a place where people sit down for reasons other than fatigue. He brought me to a room at the end of the mezzanine that had been set up as a receiving space, which is to say it had chairs, and a low table, and a formal arrangement of, I believe they were called presentation flowers, the kind that do not occur in nature but have been cultivated for ceremonial use, with blooms in the Solène household colors of pale silver and deep violet. It was a nicer room than any room I have been in on official business. The Empress was there. She had removed the morning coat. Someone had brought her the kind of formal jacket you wear in a public space, and it was on, though not fully fastened, which I noticed and then decided was not my concern. She was seated when I came in, but she stood. I did not know whether to bow. I know that you bow. I was not sure of the angle, or whether dock workers bow, or whether we are expected to do something else, or whether the fact that she was standing changed the protocol. I did a sort of inclination of the head and shoulders that seemed like it might be appropriate. "Sit down," she said, not unkindly. She sat, and she indicated the chair across from her. I sat. There were 4 people in the room besides the 2 of us. The chamberlain, the military woman from before, another security officer, and a small young woman with a recording device who was clearly a court scribe, and who was trying very hard to be invisible, which is an effort I respect. The Empress looked at me. She had a steady quality to her attention that I imagine is useful when you are in the position of having to be in the room with a great many different kinds of people across a great many different kinds of situations. She was not looking at my dock vest, or at the oil smear, or at the headlamp-shaped bulge in my pocket. She was looking at me. There is a difference between those things, and I noticed it. She was perhaps 50, though she looked a little younger in the face and a little older in the posture of someone who has been making decisions in front of people for many years, which is its own kind of wear. Her hair was dark with the first threads of silver at the temples, and she wore no visible ornamentation beyond the formal jacket, which tells you something, though I am not sure exactly what. She had a quality that I have noticed in a few people over the years, surgeons, sometimes, and once a crane operator I worked with for a season who could bring a 40-ton load to within a centimeter of a mark without instruments. The quality of a person for whom the world is primarily information rather than theater. "You fixed it," she said. "Yes," I said. "What was it?" I told her. I said the secondary arms guide wire had shifted laterally at guide 43, a small displacement, around 8 millimeters, but enough to create a repeating lateral pull on the tension coupling, which had been redirecting the approach geometry on every attempt. The ship was not failing to dock. The clamp was pulling it offline. I said I had reseated the wire and checked the adjacent guides, and the arm was now in correct alignment. She listened to this. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How long did it take you?" she said. "About 20 minutes," I said. 19, maybe. Another pause. "My navigators spent 3 days on the approach corridor," she said. "The approach corridor was fine," I said. "The ship was fine. The pilot was fine." I paused, because I did not want to say anything that would reflect badly on the navigators, who were doing their jobs and doing them carefully and were working with the information they had, which is all any of us can do. The problem was inside the arm. If you're not looking for it there, you don't see it. "Why were you looking for it there?" "Because the failure point was the same every time," I said. "Consistent failure means a fixed obstruction, and the secondary arm is the thing I know best on this ring." She looked at me for a moment with an expression that was not quite what I would call admiration. It was a more careful thing than that, more considered, as though she was updating a model of the world that had not previously included me in it. "What is your name?" she said. I told her. Soraya Kell, dock crew, primary ring, 22 years on the Solène outer cradle. She repeated my name. Not out loud. I saw her mouth move slightly, the way you move your mouth when you are memorizing something. "You were dismissed from the bay," she said. It was not quite a question. "My supervisor was following protocol," I said. "The primary team had jurisdiction. That's the right call when you have specialists on site." She looked at me. I think she was deciding whether I was being diplomatic or whether I actually believed what I said. I actually believed what I said, for what it's worth. Darrett was following procedure. Procedure is there for reasons. The fact that I went around it does not mean the procedure was wrong. "You went anyway," she said. "Yes," I said. "Why?" I thought about this for a moment. The honest answer is that I could not sleep, and that I thought I was right, and that when you are 53 years old and you have spent 22 years building an understanding of something, the possibility that your understanding is correct is not something you can simply set aside because you were told to stand your section. But that is a longer answer than what I said, which was. The window was closing. If it was the cable and nobody looked, the ship would have to stand off for 3 more days. I thought someone should look. The Empress was quiet for a long time after that. The scribe's recording device made a small adjustment sound. The Chamberlain behind me shifted his weight. "What do you earn?" the Empress said. I told her, "It is a fair wage for the work and I have no complaints about it. It is enough to live on and a little more, which at my age and with my circumstances is what you want from a job, not excitement, not prestige, just sufficiency and the satisfaction of the work itself." She nodded once. "I want to give you a title," she said. "First Keeper of the Cradle. It is an old designation. It was used in the early period of the station, for the officer who oversaw the entire dock operation. It has been vacant for some years. The position would carry a rank equivalent to senior station officer, a title of address, a formal stipend in addition to your current wages, and a place in the cradle's ceremonial staff." I looked at her. She looked back. "It is not a small thing," she said. "No," I said, "I understand that, thank you." I paused. "I'd like to go back to my dock," I said. The Chamberlain made a sound behind me that I chose not to classify. The Empress did not make a sound. She looked at me, and then, slowly, in a way that reached her eyes before it reached her mouth, and that I do not think she was entirely in control of, she smiled. "Why," she said. "I know this dock," I said. 22 years. I know every arm, every cable run, every guide in every channel on the primary ring. There are 3 junior hands on my section right now who are good and learning fast, and I am most useful to them where I am, not in a title. The cradle runs because the people who know it stay with it. I could assign you a supervisory role in the same section," she said. "The title would not remove you from the work." "That's generous," I said, "and I understand why you're offering it. But the thing I did this morning, I did it because I know this dock well enough that I know when something is wrong that nobody else is seeing. That kind of knowing takes a long time to build, and it's built by doing the work, not by overseeing it. If I take a supervisory role, in 5 years I'll be the one who has to be told." She was looking at me in a way that I could not fully read. I think there was something in it that was not just about the dock or the title, something more general, something she was thinking through that I had perhaps said something relevant to, though I could not be sure what. "Is there anything I can give you?" she said. "As a sovereign to a citizen who has done something for the Reach?" I thought about it. I genuinely did for a moment, because the question deserved a real answer and not a reflexive one. "A note," I said finally, "for my foreman, Darrett. He went by the book and the book was right, and he'll feel badly when he hears the full account. It would help him to know that the procedure was followed correctly and that the outcome was not a failure of supervision." The Empress looked at me. "A note," she said. "He's a good foreman," I said. "He doesn't need to carry this wrong." There was a silence in the room. Then the Empress turned to the Chamberlain and said something in a low voice. The Chamberlain made a notation. The Empress turned back to me. "The note will be sent to him today," she said, "under my seal." "Thank you," I said. "Is that all?" I thought again. "Maybe one other thing," I said. "Guide 43 on the secondary arm, the low-friction guide that the wire shifted against, it's showing accelerated wear. It should be flagged for early inspection, 6 months ahead of schedule. It's in the maintenance log, but it'll be classified as a routine item. Someone should know to move it forward." She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at the military woman behind her and said, "Flag it." The military woman made a note. "Anything for yourself?" the Empress said. I considered. No, I said, I have what I need. She held my eyes for a long moment, and then she said, in a tone that was different from the formal tenor of the rest of the conversation, quieter, more direct, as though she were simply a person saying something true rather than a sovereign speaking to a citizen. I saw you from the observation deck, when you came out from under the arm. I didn't know who you were. I saw a dock worker in an orange vest, and you stood there for a moment, and then you put your tool on your belt and walked back the way you had come. And then my flagship moved. I did not know what to say to this. I said, yes. I thought, she said, that I would like to know the name of that person. Soraya Kell, I said, primary ring. Soraya Kell, she said, primary ring. She stood. I stood. I did the shoulder inclination again, because it had seemed acceptable the first time. She inclined her head toward me, which I think was a form of acknowledgement, and then the chamberlain was beside me again, and I was being walked back through the mezzanine corridor toward the dock level. The coronation ceremony was held that morning as planned. I heard it over the intercom on the dock floor. There is a speaker on the secondary armed service path that picks up the general station broadcast, and the ceremony was carried on the general station broadcast, which is tradition. I was doing an inspection of Guide 41 through 45, while the formal installation was being read out, because someone needed to do it and it was in my section, and I had already pulled the cable channel open for the morning's work. I heard the Empress's name read in full, all 7 parts of it, the way the formal name is read at an installation, each part a different lineage or an old title or a geographic claim going back 500 or 600 years. It took about 3 minutes. Guide 43 was in worse shape than I had thought from the initial inspection. I flagged it in the log for immediate review, not 6 months early, immediate. I wrote the inspection note in the log the way Darrett has always told us to write them. Specific, measured, no interpretive language, just what I saw and the measurements and my recommendation. I signed it. I time-stamped it. The ceremony continued over the speaker. I moved to Guide 44. Darrett found me there about an hour after the ceremony ended. He came down the service path with his tablet and his earpiece, the way he always comes, and he stood at the end of the armed service rail and looked at me for a moment before he said anything. I got a note, he said. I heard, I said. I had not heard, but I thought it was likely by then. Under her seal, he said. Good. He was quiet for a moment. The note said the dock supervisor's handling of the restricted access protocol was correct and in accordance with cradle operations guidelines, he said. It said the resolution of the docking issue was the result of long institutional knowledge held by experienced dock personnel, and that the protocol restrictions appropriately channeled that knowledge rather than suppressing it. I looked at him. That's a generous read, I said. It's her read, he said. He looked at the cable channel for a moment, at the guide I had just finished annotating. He had his tablet up and was reading something. 43 looks bad, he said. It's worse than I thought this morning, I said. I've flagged it for immediate. He made a note. He scrolled something on his tablet. You came in at 4, he said. It was not quite a question. Couldn't sleep, I said. He nodded. He looked at the cable channel again, and then at the outer transparency where the Irvath Sovereign was sitting in its mooring, solid and still and enormous, its hull panels meeting without gap, its running lights in patient rows. Couldn't sleep, he said. That's right. He was quiet again. Then he said, you should have pushed harder when you came to me. I should have listened more. You were following the protocol, I said. The protocol was followed, he said. The flagship still sat for 3 days. The flagship is docked now, I said. The ceremony happened, the protocol worked. I paused. Differently than we expected, but it worked. He looked at me. He is a good man, Darrett. He does not always know what to do with me, which is fair, because I have been at this dock longer than he has, and I outrank him in years if not in grade, which is the kind of arrangement that is awkward until it isn't, and we have mostly arrived at isn't. "There's been a request," he said, "from the household office. They want to know if you'd be willing to be present on the dock floor when the Empress departs. The departure's been scheduled for this afternoon. No formal role, just present." I thought about this. "In what capacity?" I said. "I think," he said carefully, "in the capacity of the person who docked her ship." I thought about it for another moment. I looked at the cable channel. I had guides 45 through 50 to inspect, and then the tension coupling at the clamp head wanted looking at, because it had been under irregular load for 3 days, and I wanted to see how it had held. "After I finish the channel inspection," I said. He nodded. "After the channel inspection," he said. He walked back up the service path toward the bay floor. I watched him go, and then I turned back to the cable channel and pulled my inspection lamp out of my vest and started on guide 45. It was fine. 46 was fine. 47 showed a little more wear than I expected, but within tolerance. I annotated it and moved on. 48, 49, 50. Fine, fine, fine. The tension coupling at the clamp head was in good shape. Better than I had feared, actually. 3 days of irregular load had left some stress marking on the coupling housing, the kind of marking you annotate and monitor rather than act on, and I annotated it and made a note for the next scheduled inspection to pay it particular attention. The clamp jaw itself was clean and correctly tensioned, and smelled like the machine oil we had serviced it with 8 days ago, which is the smell of a well-maintained piece of equipment doing what it was built to do. I closed the cable channel. I pulled myself back to the service path. I stood there for a moment at the end of the secondary arm, 40 meters out from the base, with the flagship sitting 20 meters beyond the clamp head, its hull panels close enough that I could see the faint texture of the surface finish, the barely visible seams where the maintenance panels were set flush. The running lights were off in the daylight cycle of the cradle's environmental system, which makes the ship look different from when you see it at approach, more solid, more material, less like a thing that moves through space and more like a thing that simply is. It is a beautiful ship. I have thought that both times I have seen it up close, and I thought it again now, standing on the secondary arm of the dock that had kept it, with my harness clipped and my inspection lamp back in my pocket. I walked back to the floor. The departure was at the 14th hour, cradle time. I was on the dock floor in my usual place, near the secondary arm's base, where I can see both the arm and the bay mouth, and the guide light panel at the same time, which is the information-rich position for anyone who wants to understand what is happening in a docking operation rather than simply observe it. There were more people on the floor than usual. Not a crowd, it is still a working dock, and the work does not stop for departures any more than it stops for arrivals, but more people had found reasons to be in the bay than strictly needed to be. Darrett was near the primary arms control station. He caught my eye and gave me a nod, which means everything is in hand. I nodded back. The departure sequence began on schedule. The mooring line was fed back through the jaw coupling. The primary clamp arm released. The secondary arm, my arm, I always think of it that way, held the forward guide steady as the flagship's thrusters brought her up to separation pressure, and then the secondary clamp head released, and the guide lights went to departure green, and the Irvath Sovereign began to move. Not abruptly. Very slowly, the way a ship of that mass moves when it is being careful, the kind of motion that is not quite perceptible if you are watching the wrong thing, and obvious and inevitable if you are watching the right thing. I was watching the hull panels at the bow as they crossed the guide light reference line, which is the right thing to watch on a departure of this class. The hull panels crossed. The bow cleared. The midsection came out through the bay mouth. The stern, long and clean, and finished with the same care as the rest of it, followed. The Irvath Sovereign cleared the bay and moved into the holding corridor, running lights coming back up now against the backdrop of the Reach's star field, precise and patient. The guide lights on both arms went to all green, which means separation complete, bay clear, operation nominal. I watched the flagship for another few minutes through the outer transparency. It held in the holding corridor until the departure vector was confirmed. I could see the faint blue signature of the orientation thrusters making micro-adjustments, the ship finding its line. And then the drive system came up, a deep signature you feel more than hear when you are on the dock floor and the bay is quiet. And the flagship moved out of the holding corridor and into the transit corridor, and then it was gone. I stood there for a moment in the empty bay. Then I went to write up my inspection log from the morning's cable channel work, because it had been in my head all day and I wanted to get it down while it was fresh. And because the log is the log and it needs to be current. And because there is a satisfaction in writing a good inspection log that I would not trade for much. I thought, while I was writing, about the Empress's face when she had watched me from the observation deck. I had not known she was there. I found out later from Darrett, who found out from the household staff, that she had been watching the bay from the observation deck on the residential mezzanine since the early hours of the morning, having been woken by her chamberlain, with the news that the docking team had run out of solutions and the window was narrowing. She had been standing there when I came out from under the secondary arm. She had watched me check my harness and put my wrench on my belt and walk back toward the guard post, and then she had watched her flagship move. I do not know exactly what she felt in that moment. I can imagine a version of it, the relief first, certainly, and then the question of what she had just seen, and the decision that she needed to know the answer to that question. That seems right. I know what I felt, which was that the cable was correct and the ship would dock, and the inspection log for Guide 43 was going to be a significant item, and I needed to flag it properly. There is probably a gap in those two experiences that says something about the difference between the work and the recognition of the work. I have thought about that more than once since that morning. I am not sure what conclusion I draw from it, except that both things matter. The work matters because the ship needs to dock. The recognition matters because people need to be seen doing it. I think about the offer sometimes. The title, First Keeper of the Cradle. I looked it up afterward, the old records, the early station documents, and found that it had been a real designation, exactly as she said, used in the cradle's first 15 years before the operational structure was reorganized. The name appears in 3 of the founding documents. It was held in its first iteration by a woman named Vesa Oren, who was the head dock mechanic at the station's commissioning, and who, according to the records, had spent 11 of those 15 years doing what I have spent 22 years doing, learning the arms and the cables and the guides and the particular language of the machinery. The third document in the sequence is a maintenance log in Oren's hand. I looked at the log for a long time. The handwriting is careful and precise, the entries specific and technical, the recommendations clear. She had good inspection discipline. I appreciated that. I did not take the title. I meant what I said when I declined it. But I understood, after looking at those records, why the Empress had reached for that specific designation. She was not offering me a reward. She was recognizing a continuity, the line of people who have known the cradle the way it needs to be known. I was content to be in that line without the name attached to it. I was seen, more than I expected, by someone who had no reason to be watching. I am not sure what to do with that except to keep it, the way you keep the few things that are true and earned and that you did not ask for. I finished the inspection log. I signed it, I time-stamped it. I put my pen in my vest pocket, next to the headlamp. I went home. My youngest called the next evening, not his regular second Verath call, an unscheduled one. He had seen something in the general network, he said. Something about the coronation. He wanted to know if I was the dock worker. I told him I was. He was quiet for a moment. He is the quieter of my two, which is saying something, because neither of them takes after my side of the family for talk. Then he said, "Mum, the Empress offered you a title and you said no." I said that was more or less what happened. He was quiet again. Then he said, "Was the title the important part?" I thought about this for a moment, because it is the kind of question that deserves a real answer. "No," I said, "the cable was the important part. The title was generous. The cable was the thing that needed doing." Another pause. "Are you going back to the dock?" "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Guide 43 needs immediate review and I want to be there when the inspection team goes through it." He laughed. He does not laugh often, my youngest, and when he does it comes out a little surprised, like he was not expecting it from himself. "All right," he said. "All right, second Varath then." "Second Varath," I said. I hung up, I made dinner, I slept well. At 4 the next morning I woke up without an alarm, the way I always do. I dressed. I put my tools on my belt. I clipped my credential to my vest. I went to the dock.